Today we're going to talk about squaring a board. And what we do when we square a board is we take a rough piece of lumber and we break it down and machine it until it's nice and square and smooth on all sides. So if I look at this board, this has been squared. You can see it's got a very smooth surface. Normally I'll buy rough lumber for the shop. It's a little bit cheaper and also is easier to tell if you've already surfaced a surface. First thing I can do is I can take a look at the end here, and that is square and 90 degrees. I can take a look at this face to this edge, and that's going to be square and 90 degrees. This other surface over here is going to be 90 degrees to that edge. This edge to the end, also 90 degrees. This edge to this end, also 90 degrees. This face to that edge, 90 degrees. And this face to this edge, also 90 degrees. Everything on this board is square. All surfaces are at 90 to each other. Now for a squared board, that's perfect. But if this is going somewhere angled and this needs to be at a 45, then it's going to be a little bit different. But for now, all we're doing is we're worrying about squaring a board. This is how our lumber usually starts. So this is just a big piece. It's an arbitrary width. It's whatever came out of the mill. So they cut it up as wide as the tree is, as many pieces as they can get out of it. The length could vary. Generally, they're going to be in that like 8 to 10 foot length in something like maple like this. You can see that the surface on this is really rough. It's got some saw marks in it from going through the mill. The end has some paint on it. It's definitely not square. I guarantee it's going to have some cupping, so if we look at the end of this, it will be cupped a little bit in the direction. It's actually going to cup up this way, but we'll talk about that later when we get to the joiner lessons. So we're going to take this and we're going to break it down and we're going to end up with a board that is dimensioned and square the size that we need. There are 7 steps to squaring a board that you guys are all responsible to know, and these are them. The first one is rough cut. So we'll go to the miter saw and we'll take a cut and we'll cut it down generally 1/2 inch to 1 inch longer than we actually need it, so we can get those final cuts and get the ends in. If I need a 12-inch board, I'm never going to cut 12 inches on the miter saw. I'll cut 12 1/2. Then we're going to joint the face, and joining the face is going to give us one very, very smooth, flat surface that we can reference all other sides off of as we go through the squaring process. Then we're going to joint an edge, and what that'll do is that's the first time we're going to have true 90 degrees. So we'll make sure that that face and that edge are totally at 90 to each other. We're going to plane the thickness. We'll get it down to its desired thickness, and at that point we will have a flat surface on the bottom that we jointed, and then a flat surface that's coplanar on the top. So anywhere you take a measurement, they will be exactly the same thickness all the way through. They're not going to wedge or do anything weird. There won't be any cups or dips and anything in that. Then we're going to rip to width, and a rip cut is when we come and we change this dimension on the face. So we change the width, and we're cutting with the grain. So that's a rip. After we've done that, we're going to square an end. So we'll cut the end off right here and make sure that that's at 90 degrees to everything else. And then we'll get to our final length. So whatever we decide our final length is going to be, then we'll cut it and we'll have a squared board at that point. All right, here we are at the miter station. This is where we're going to do our rough cut. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this rough piece of lumber that I brought over, and I'm going to measure out how long I want this to be. Now for most of our equipment, especially the planer when we get there, and the table saw, I really don't want you guys ever cutting anything under 12 inches long. So 12 inches is going to be the minimum length on the table saw that we can cut. Also when we go through the planer, we need it to be 12 inches or longer. So if you need a 6-inch piece, what we're going to do is we're going to cut it to 12 inches and then cut it down to 6. We can cross cut to 6 on the table saw, no problem, but when we're doing our ripping cut and we're getting it to length, it's just a little bit too dangerous for beginning students to be cutting anything under 12 inches long, so we're going to go ahead and we're going to leave it a little bit longer. In the end, it wastes a little bit more wood, but it's much, much safer, and keeping you guys with all your fingers is my goal. So what I'm going to do is, like I said, 12 inches is my end goal here, so I'm going to come up to 12, and then I'll go up to 12 1/2, and I'm going to make a mark there. Once I get all my safety equipment on, we can go ahead and we can make our cut. And that's it for the miter saw. All right, this is the joiner, and what the joiner does is it's got this cutter head in here, and it's going to take my board, slide it across that cutter head, and make sure that I have a completely flat surface in relationship to this table. It might take a pass or two to make sure that it's completely flat, but then once I have that flat surface, I'll have a reference surface on my board that I can use up against this fence. We'll make sure that this fence is at 90 degrees. Once we check that for 90, we can run it through. So what I'll do before I even get started is let's just go ahead and check it for 90. So I'm going to come in here, and this is off of 90, so I'm going to take this, and we're just going to adjust it really quickly before we get started. Bring it in. All right, there we are, and we are at a bit off of 90. Good. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and stop there. All right, let me get my safety equipment on, and then we can make our cut. One thing about this machine is as it cuts, all the chips fall down, and they fall into a chute. And if your dust collection isn't on, it won't evacuate those chips out. And if it doesn't evacuate the chips out, they can get backed up that column, and I'll just start spraying chips all over the place. So we really want to make sure that the dust collector's on with this one. So once we have our nice flat surface, we're going to use that as a reference. We're going to put it up against the fence and then get this edge. We want to make sure that our jointed surface, you can see how much brighter that is because it doesn't have all this fluff on it. We want to make sure that nice jointed surface is up against the fence. If you take your rough surface and put it against the fence, you won't have a nice square 90 degrees because you won't be referencing off of this nice flat surface. All right, at this point, we're at our third stage, so we've cut to rough length. We've done our rough cut. We have a flat surface. We have a nice face on this, and we have a nice edge. And if I check these should be a perfect 90 degree to each other. So if I bring that down, you should see no gap in that at all, even if I do it out at the edge. Anywhere down this, there should be no gap at all. So I know that off of this flat surface, which we cut on the joiner, I now have a referenced perfect 90 degrees. So the next step in this, in 7 steps of scoring a board, is to plane this to thickness and get this down to the thickness that we want. All right, here we are at the planer, and what this is going to do is this has a cutter up top that's going to take and shave the top of this board off in reference to this flat surface. So after this, they call it a planer because at the end we'll have 2 surfaces that are co-planar. So they will be exactly parallel to each other through the entire thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn on the dust collector, and I'm going to get on my safety gear, and then we'll go ahead and run this through. Most lumber that we run, we're going to run through till 3/4 of an inch. It's kind of the standard thickness for most furniture. So here we go. now we have our 3/4 inch board. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take it over to the table saw and we're gonna get these two sides parallel and get our final width on this board. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is a rip cut on this table saw, and I have my rip fence set up. The blade is here. The blade's not adjusted to the right height, but I'll go ahead and do that before we make our cut. I've got my push stick ready to go. On a narrower cut, anything less than 8 inches, I want to make sure that I get in there and I can make my push through with a push stick, not my hands. It's a little too close to the blade for that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring this up and I'm going to adjust the blade height down to where it needs to be, just so the gullets are popping out of my wood. Then I can bring this over. As far as width goes, there's a big ruler that runs down here. I'll go ahead and set this at 5 inches. So we have a 5-inch final length. There we go. And if I want to, I can come out and I can just double check against the blade that my fence is indeed accurate. And it is. It's going to cut it exactly at 5 inches. So next thing I'm going to do is turn on the dust collector and get on my safety gear, and then I'll be ready to go to make my cut. All right, now we have a board that's it's got two surfaces here that are totally in plane, coplanar, and parallel. It now has two edges that are coplanar, and the last thing we don't know about are these ends. So we got to make sure that these ends are square to the rest of the board. So if I just grab this and I grab my square and take a look at it, they're not square. They're not even close to square. There's huge, huge gaps over here. I don't know if you guys can see it from there, but not good. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a sled that's all set to 90 degrees. We're going to have to raise the blade a little bit. We'll cut an end, so we'll square one end, and then I can set the length to the final length that we want. So let me go ahead and grab that, and then we can make our cuts. All right, so here's our sled. And this fence is already set to 90 degrees, so we are good on that. And then we can set our length up here with this stop, which you can flip up and flip down if you need to. So let's go ahead and keep this out of the way for now, because all we're doing is we're setting this at square. Now to make sure that the blade height is going to be appropriate, I'm going to go ahead and put it on the sled and raise that blade up till the gullets are just coming out. I'm going to slide this over to the edge, just make sure that I have enough. I'm just trimming the edge to square. So let me get on my safety gear and then dust collector, and we'll make our cut. Now we've finished our cut. We'll pull this off and I can check that, and that is perfectly 90 degrees and where it should be. So we made this cut like this. So to reference, I'm going to use this same edge and just flip this over and make sure I have the same edge that we're using as last time. So I'm going to put this right here. Now I'm going to set this at the distance that I want, or the length that I want. Remember, 12 inches was my end goal. So we're going to come in here, we're going to bring this down to 12 inches, which is right there. set that at 12. Now I'm going to go put my safety gear on, we're going to cut this, and then we'll have a 12-inch by 5-inch by 3/4 board when we're done, and it'll be perfectly square. So in the end, what we ended up with was a perfectly square board. So if I go through this, the width is 5 inches. It's in a spot where you can see. So it's 5 inches up here, and it should be 5 inches down here because it's totally parallel, right? So that no point should it be under 5 inches. It should be the entire thing. The thickness is going to be 3/4 of an inch, and that should be 3/4 all the way down. And then the length, we should be right at 12, and we're right at 12 over here. We're right at 12 over here, because this is a perfectly squared board. 7 steps to squaring a board: rough cut, joint face, joint edge, plane to thickness, rip to width, square and end, final length.